Why don't we just start with introducing ourselves and saying what we do?
Yeah, so my name's Michael Paraskevas, and I'm the co-composer for Agatha All Along. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Of course. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited. For those who don't know, I'm Kate. I am an actor, content creator, and disability advocate, and also a huge Agatha All Along fan and fan of all things witchy in general. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've listened to the score front and back, so I'm excited to dig into it. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and like how you got into music?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very musical family. My dad's a music teacher, and I grew up, playing different instruments and, learned clarinet, piano, guitar, vocals, and you hear some of that in the score actually. Got to get back to my roots. But yeah, and just grew up, playing all types of music and also really got into film and film history and, just loved so many different types of storytelling and grew up on like the Disney classics, of course, the 90s baby, and like loved like the James Bond movies and like the music
Ooh.
in there. I think was really inspirational and like let me see like the power that music can have in this medium. By the time I got to high school, I really started like dabbling and making like really shitty tracks on GarageBand and sort of playing around with that, but became like addicted and started taking it more seriously and realized it's something that I could pursue full time. So I did like a senior capstone project in high school where I scored excerpts from the silent movies Metropolis and Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. And so, really got to like explore actually putting music to picture and have basically been doing that ever since. Went to school, studied composition, and then came out to LA and I've been here almost 10 years now, just trying to trying to do the thing.
What school did you go to, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so my undergrad, I went to University of Tulsa in Oklahoma. And it was a really awesome program. It was a smaller school, so I was able to be involved in so many different things and play in
Mm.
all these different ensembles. I was in the band, I was in the choir, I was in orchestra, learned jazz, like, really got to like try it all. And I think that's, as a creator, whatever discipline you're doing, I think the best type of learning is hands-on, especially for music. Like you got to actually soak it up and listen and expose yourself to so many different styles, which comes in handy for film scoring specifically because there's just you get asked to do anything and everything. So they did that for undergrad, and then for grad school, I spent 1 year in Seattle at the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, directed by Hummy Man, and that one was more focused on film scoring. He and the other teachers there all had active careers in the industry, and so we got to really be learn the tools of the trade that you don't normally learn in the classroom, and really set us up for success.
That's awesome. Yeah, those small programs, especially with the arts, tend to be very. I mean, I went to a big school, but we had a small program. So I understand you get a lot more hands on experience that way, and that's really helpful. Did you meet anybody during your grad program? Because you said that you were working with people who all had very active careers. Did you meet anyone who kind of helped you through to that next step to going to LA?
Yeah, I mean, the program director Hummy was an amazing mentor, and just has such a passion and knack for connecting with students and really showing us the way to go. And a group of us moved down to LA and we're all started our careers, and we're all still down here working and
Oh,
still good
wow.
friends, and collaborate from time to time, and always have a good community, especially at a smaller school like that where you don't necessarily have the same sort of connections that some of these other bigger film programs do. I think finding the right people, no matter who they are, where they're from, is important in any field, but especially in like a freelancing creative arts field, because that's ultimately where you find work and where you build relationships, and it's a long journey. But I think having finding your right coven is what it takes.
That's a great way of putting it. Finding your coven is very important. The amount of random opportunities and stuff I've gotten from just interacting with people and just reaching out and stuff and just meeting people. And especially in such an uncertain industry, having people who have your back and who also understand what you're going through with like the challenges is super important, I can imagine, not only for career, but also just personal mental health.
Oh, definitely, yeah. There's so much uncertainty, as you know, and especially nowadays, Hollywood has been going through this transition of, adjusting to streaming, the streaming era, and AI is like the big conversation
Hmm.
topic the past few years. And there's so many things unknown that, it's constantly changing. And I think all the more reason to surround yourself with great people and, finding ways to, move on, because it's, there's always going to be something, and technology is always advancing, and it's always disrupting the status quo. And I think there's an exciting part to that too, of like learning new tools and learning more efficient ways of doing things. But I think ultimately it's like finding that right group of people as well.
I think that's like really important. That's really obviously a big theme of the show as well. But on that track, how much, because obviously we just talked about how Hollywood has been changing and stuff. You said you've been in LA for 10 years. How much, like, what are the big changes you've seen from the time you first got there to now?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, probably like most industries, COVID really like
Mm.
changed a lot of the way we do things, and in some ways for better. Like, there's more flexibility, and now I work from home. I've worked from home ever since then. A lot of our meetings are over Zoom, even if you were meeting with people that are only a few miles away. And I think there's some things that have made that easier. And now filmmaking specifically, is the pool has kind of expanded, and you're able to collaborate with people on the other side of the world. We were doing some of that before, but now it's even easier. The technology has gotten better for that sort of thing. For Agatha, we recorded the score in Vienna, and
Really?
literally just sitting right here on Zoom, and
Wow.
listening to a feed from them, and then we're able to give notes back and forth and talk to them over Zoom, which is really amazing. And ideally, yeah, like we could be in the same room together. And I don't think anything will ever beat, in any sort of collaborative process, like being together in the same room to share ideas. But I know the reality of it too, as well as the financial reality of it, is that's not always available. And I think
Hmm.
we found cool ways to adapt to that. And I think the flip side of that is LA specifically as like a film hub, has that's starting to change, and you're seeing that so much is going not just across the country but globally. And I think the community here is feeling that, that
Hmm.
difference, before COVID. And after COVID, we had the strikes, the actors and the
Hmm.
writer strikes. We had the fires earlier this year. So it's like one thing after the other, putting pressure on all this work and maintaining jobs. And I think with any industry, it kind of goes through these ups and downs, and you hope that we're able to find ways to adapt, and the LA film community can, be stronger. And also we can still be collaborative with all these, this amazing network outside of LA as well. So it's just, you kind of take it as it goes and try to keep your
Yeah.
head above water.
Yeah. Because yeah, COVID definitely put a wrench in a lot of things for sure. It changed like everything. But to your point, I think it opened the door for broader collaboration, because I had never done a Zoom before COVID. You know what I mean? Like, it never crossed my mind to collaborate in that way. I always, collaborate with the people in front of you, especially because I come from theater. So it's like, it's very like who's right in front of you. But I think it has like broadened the horizons. I mean, even this, we're on different sides of the country and we're talking right now. So I do think that is one positive from COVID for sure. But obviously, the film industry, between the strikes and also the fires and everything, has really it's been going through it.
For sure. But like I said, everyone's going through it in different ways, and we'll find a way to
Hmm.
to make it through and make something cool and make something better.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you have a strong community over there because that is so important. Speaking of your community, you have a writing partner. Why don't you tell me a little more about how you guys met and how you came to work with him?
Yeah, so I co-scored the show with Christophe Beck, who's had this really long, illustrious career, starting with Buffy back in the '90s, and
Oh, wow, yeah.
Frozen and Ant-Man, and all these other things in between. So yeah, when I moved out here, and a couple years into that, I started assisting him, and found him to be a very strong mentor, and really learned a lot. Learning his process and his approach to film scoring, his approach to writing music, his approach to business, which is a whole other side of the job that you again, you can't learn that in school. And just being there day to day in a studio and really seeing the ins and outs of everything and how everything works. And yeah, so just over the years became more and more creatively involved with different projects. And we worked on WandaVision together, and then Hawkeye in 2021. That was the first score that we co-scored together. I was really thankful for getting the chance to really step up and to share that credit and to really put my own stamp on the creative process. And we continued that again, and with Agatha's, we coming from WandaVision, we're able to sort of revisit that world, but again allowed a chance for me to sort of take more of a leadership in that process and work together on creating this fun score, and had a blast doing it. And I think as you talk about surrounding yourself with good people, I think a big part of that in sort of any industry is finding a mentor as well that you can learn and grow from, because it's there's always more you can learn. You never stop, and there's so many different ways to do things and so many questions just like how does this stuff work. And I think it really helps having that sort of relationship.
Yeah, especially with the industry changing as much as it is, having someone who can kind of be that guiding light through all of that, I think that's really special, and I think important. And I think aspect of being in the arts and stuff that people don't talk about as much. But I think almost anyone who has been in the arts or anything can think about a few key people in their life who like really mentored them and helped them through. How did you meet?
Yeah, so just actually through a recommendation through Zach Robinson. He used to work for Chris, and someone I had met when I first moved out, and we developed our own relationship, and then eventually Chris needed an extra pair of hands, and he just put my name out there and haven't looked back since. So
That's awesome.
a little bit of like right place at the right time, but I think it's also like once you do have those opportunities and you show up, then you have to like do the work. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Got to
think,
seize the opportunity. I don't know if this is a well-known phrase. It probably is, but I had a teacher a while back that said it's luck meets preparation.
oh,
Like
for
you get
sure.
these moments, but you got to be ready for them, because you don't know how many of those like big moments are going to just come around. You were in the right place at the right time, but you were also prepared and ready to take on,
Yeah,
what
and I
what
think,
came at you.
thankful for all that, the schooling that we talked about, and having other mentors and other teachers, each step along the way. That's I think I always liken it to like you're carrying a tool chest, and you're always adding different things, and you never know what you're going to use or how you're going to use it. But having that, and it's something that you continually build, then you have these moments where you get to actually display that, and explore those things that you've accumulated over the years.
How did you have a plan when you initially went to LA, or were you just kind of like, I'm just gonna go and see what happens?
My plan was just show up, and I was like, all right, here I am. What do I do? Which I think I was young and naive enough to like not let that sort of dissuade me from doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then I think I quickly learned that like once you get there, like school is just like a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything to
Mm-hmm.
anyone, and it doesn't really matter sort of where you come from or who you are. To some degree, you kind of start from the bottom, and you have to sort of find a way. So it's really just a lot of just trying to connect with people, going to different networking events and grabbing coffee, and quickly found that like there's so many nice and wonderful people who are willing to give their time, and like they've all been through this before. And so I think you try to find those people that are willing to give back. And something that I try to do now is been out here long enough and constantly hearing from younger composers who want to get into the industry, or hear about my experience. And so just trying to pay it forward. Eventually you started sort of build your own community, and the longer you're there and the more you're connected with different people, then the world starts opening up to you. And but it never stops too. Like even 10 years in, like I'm still hitting people up for coffee, and
So
still
many
trying to,
coffee dates.
yeah, lots of coffee. I have to tap the brakes on it sometimes, because there's too much caffeine pulsing through my body. But yeah, just finding ways to connect. And I think that's ultimately what we do as creators and artists, is we're connecting with other people to create cool shit that's trying to connect with more people, like a bigger
Hmm.
audience. And there's something special about that, this form of communication that we've been doing as human beings for our entire existence. And I think
Hmm.
there is something honorable and inspiring in that regard that I think keeps me moving. You ever feel like that?
Hmm. Oh yeah, because there are definitely moments where I'm just like, what am I doing? But to your point, those of us who do creative things and stuff, it feels wrong to do anything else. You know what I mean? It feels like this is what we were supposed to be doing. But I think it's really like admirable and special that you see the importance of paying it forward, because I think some people get so caught up once they do find success that they forget where they came from, or they forget the little guys who were just starting out. And I think that's really important, and something I definitely wanted to highlight when you said it. But speaking of like, reaching people and like community and all that, that's a big theme in Agatha is, forming your coven, forming community. And like, one of the whole big things is you really can't do it alone. It's like very difficult to get through this life alone, which I think Agatha starts to figure out when she realizes the shortcomings in her own magical talents and everything. So how did you integrate that into the score out of curiosity? Because when I listened to the score, I did notice a lot of like overlapping. Like when I would listen to bits that were Rio's parts, I could hear Agatha's sort of woven in there, and like it felt like a lot of weaving the characters into one another.
The music is following the picture and then following the nuances and the different waves of what's going on screen. And I think especially this type of scoring with like Marvel, where you have these very distinct characters, we love coming up with very identifiable themes for each one, and very specific melody, very specific sound palette, very specific instrument. And so we're able to really, I think, at the beginning, really focus on what those things are. Agatha has this sort of whimsical, sort of mischievous quality to her theme, but then like as we dig into her trauma and dig into her backstory, it gets way more intense and tragic, and that becomes a very identifiable part of her character and her music. Whereas Rio is this more alien character, and as she's there's this duality to her, as she's this death embodiment of like death itself, and this unstoppable force of nature. So have these like pounding drums and these really aggressive growling synths and bass clarinet, super processed. But then we balance that out with her relationship with Agatha and their romantic history, and as the crazy ex-girlfriend. And it has this more ethereal and sort of melancholy vibe to her theme. And then like with Billy, it's the mystery of who his character is, his connection to Wanda. And so there's actually some similarities, very subtly to his theme and Wanda's theme, and sort of following a similar 3-note structure. And then we also have the Coven theme, which is, just super playful and fun. But then as the show goes on, and they're encountering these trials and they're growing stronger together, and their sisterhood bond is like becoming something just really powerful and beautiful, and they're sort of reclaiming themselves. Then the Coven theme also sort of levels up with them and has more gravitas and more intensity and drama to it. And so I think you kind of spend a lot of time sort of like really honing in on each one of those things, and then kind of throughout the show, then once we've established those building blocks, it's easy to weave in and out of that, and let the music sort of tell the story, subliminally, how the different characters interact, their emotional states, and like the tone of what's going on. Because that's also is kind of the really fun thing about the show, but also really tricky from a musical standpoint, is like there's so many tonal shifts just from Agatha alone. Like her character is so nuanced, and Catherine Hahn's performance has so many layers to it, and she's so funny and smart, but also like really mean and like a bully to everyone. and like trying to find that balance, really letting the picture sort of guide us, and it kind of dictates like what the music should be in a certain sense.
That's really cool because like I watched an interview because I did research you. I watched an interview where you made a comment about the like individual scores for the characters almost being like costumes for
Mm.
them. I had never considered it like that, but that's really true. You know, you hear it's like you see certain costumes, you immediately think certain characters, but you hear certain music and you also it immediately takes you to like a certain character or a certain moment. And I think those like attention to detail and the attention to detail throughout the whole score is just truly like brilliant. I do think it's part of what made the show special. And I think you guys succeeded in the tonal shifts because you're right. Like there's one moment where you're like heartbroken, and the next moment you got Agatha impersonating Sharon.
And there you were, bringing chills and thrills and bringing on my own early demise.
Catherine Hahn is hilarious, but I mean, it really goes all over the place because then 2 minutes later, she's encountering her mother's ghost and dealing with immense trauma. I can imagine that, accompanied with also the fact that the whole set shifts so much. I mean, you got one that's in kind of like a beach house, you got one moment where it's like the 70s. Like, I can imagine trying to keep everything cohesive while also honoring those shifts was a challenge.
Yeah, no, those genre shifts were probably one of the more fun aspects of it, but also probably the hardest aspect of scoring the show. Just because, you know, typically like your first episode of whatever show you're scoring, like you kind of establish that palette, and then you kind of just build on that throughout the rest of the series. But this one, it was basically each episode we're kind of starting from scratch each time, which is all the more reason to have these very strong character themes, because that's like the one constant that keeps it all cohesive. And then, you know, we're able to change up the instrumentation, and, you know, like the beach house rom-com vibes has a very specific sound to it. But like when they first walk into the beach house, you hear actually the Ballad of the Witch's Road like melody playing, like, but within that certain context, in this cheerful sort of challenging expectations sort of way. But then, yeah, you get to the, you know, when Agatha's mom shows up and they're doing the Ouija board, like now we're doing these like really dark 80s synths, you know, kind of the John Carpenter style thing. And also sort of the Amblin, like John Williams types, you know, his 80s scores, and having some of that, honoring that sort of style of filmmaking. But like musically, like those instruments are way different than the beach house, way different than episode one, where it's like spoofing the true crime, you know, very dark electronic, you know, palette. So yeah, it's a lot of fun doing that. But, you know, each episode, like you're kind of having to like figure it out again and again.
Yeah, because it's not
Sure,
something
yeah.
you encounter a lot in a show, but it's similar to WandaVision in that regard
Yeah.
because WandaVision also has that shift. So I thought it was cool that those two mirrored each other in that regard. You know, usually that's probably not something that happens all that often where each episode is a completely different vibe.
But I think again, it's what makes it really unique, and like you see it, you know, it's just not just musically, but also the costumes, the set design, every single aspect has to be really tied together and really honoring that. And I think, you know, Jack Schaefer, our showrunner, Mary Livanos, executive producer, they were both so clear about what that vision was, and I think having them, you know, really communicate that, and keep everyone on the same page, like really, you know, allowed us the creative freedom to do it, but also making sure that I was still honoring Agatha and still honoring like what the story should be. And I think it's just overall just like a just incredible piece of filmmaking, having all those elements together.
It's so much fun to watch because every episode, you know, we were watching it and it's like you have no idea really what's coming next. Like, I mean, truly no idea, because it could be completely different in every way. But you mentioned, you know, the weaving of the ballad into things. It was the Lopez's, right? I want to make sure I got that right. Who wrote the ballad? How did you get together with them and decide like how you were going to weave it in? And also, did they write the ballad before you guys started on the score at all, or had you already started working on the score? They wrote the ballad and then you kind of wove it in after that.
Yeah, so I believe they wrote the ballad like before they even shot the show, because
Oh,
as you
wow.
know, it's like such an integral part of the story. And they also had to record all the actors singing beforehand, so then when they're on set, they're actually recording to their own performances. And so by the time Chris and I started scoring, like pretty much all the ballad, all that stuff was done. And it was nice because it kind of served as these beacons kind of throughout the show. Like we're trying to build up to these important moments, like in episode 2 when the coven is in Agatha's basement and they're all singing it together for the first time. And that's the first time as an audience member, like we hear the actual song with words to it. I guess as the actors are performing it. But in the first and second episode, Chris and I were actually like teasing the ballad throughout the score, and just like little moments of the melody. Even like literally the opening shot of the whole show, Agatha's driving in her car and she's whistling the tune, and then the score kind of picks it up on piano and continues the melody. And at that point, like no one knows what that is. But then by the time we get to end of episode 2 and like they're all performing it together, we're all like subconsciously familiar with the song. And also it's just like really catchy. And
That was my whole personality for like weeks. It was
for
just
sure,
that
yeah.
song, and every version that came out, I was like, all right, this is the new personality.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I'm still obsessed. But I mean, the show came out in, September, October, and you get your Spotify Wrapped. It was in my top 3. And I'd only had a couple of months to listen to it, but it still overruled everything I listened to the entire year. So it's incredibly catchy.
No, it's so fun. And I think if you ask anyone who worked on the show, like it's been stuck in our heads for years. Some of them longer. Like it was such like an integral part of it. But I would just sing it to myself at home, and like musically just so fun and rich. And I think especially with how the song is integrated into the story, and how it becomes, Jack has talked about it being literally a spell like within the show, but then also as a spell from the show to the audience. If you unpack it lyrically too, and like it literally lays out the whole story to you, and all the episodes are named after lyrics from the song. And
Oh yeah, I was geeking out so hard. I was like, that lyric means this and then this, and I was like, my family, I'm pretty sure, was sick of me by the end of it. They were like, okay, we get it, and I'm like freaking out.
No, I loved like when the show was coming out, people were trying to like guess like what the next episode would be called based on the lyrics. And so it was always fun seeing like the predictions and the fan theories, knowing kind of like that's a little off, or like, oh shit, they're probably a little closer than I thought.
Because the fan response has been incredible. And yes, the fan theories. Oh, I was very much on Agatha TikTok. Every Wednesday, it would just be everyone getting on, like, with their theories, with their predictions, with their edits and stuff. Like, it was so much fun, actually, like, being part of the community while it was airing. Because, everyone was like, no, I think this is going to happen. No, I think this is going to happen. And da-da-da-da-da. Saying, if Lilia dies, we revolt. That kind of a thing. Like, it was so, oh, the day after that episode was rough on the internet. Just a kind of a fun question. How, like, closely do all of you guys who work on the show, do y'all, like, watch, like, the fan videos or, like, the fan theories? Do y'all kind of stay away from that? Or are you, like, on TikTok and Instagram being like, hee hee, like...
Oh, we definitely watch it. I think it depends on the show, and I think especially with a show like this, and knowing the response that WandaVision had, I don't think anyone was like ready for like how much WandaVision really like stirred this discourse. And obviously a lot of that was like being COVID too. Like everyone's at home watching TV and writing out their theories. Like there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool seeing that sort of engagement and how passionate people are. And, I feel like that sort of has replaced the sort of water cooler talk that, popular culture used to have pre-internet. And so I think now it's, trying to like tap into those spaces. And I think that was really fun. And especially with Agatha, I think there's a lot of moments, where the show's sort of teasing the audience as well, like dropping like Mephisto's name, or like trying to like lead people astray. It's like a sleight of hand, like while the audience might be focusing on this one detail, the story's setting up this other thing that I think there's so many twists and turns that every time you think you have it figured out, or you know who's going to die, or you know what's going to happen, the next episode has something else like you weren't expecting. And I think any type of storytelling, I think that's what's, you know, really special about this show. And like this, as a fan, just like it should be fun. And I think when you get to the end of it, you want to go back and watch it again and like sort of see all the things that you missed the first time. And I think that's something that's like really special.
It's like, it made it, you know, it wasn't just like we were watching a show. It felt more like an experience and a community. And it was funny because there were moments I would be watching the show and I'm like, I think they're playing with us. You know, like when Agatha says the line,
"Hey, you want straight answers? Ask a straight lady."
I'm like, I watched that line, I'm like, so many gays are at home screeching. Because, I mean, we don't get many queer confirmed, you know, Marvel characters. It was funny because I'm like, oh, they're playing with us. Or like,
Wanda Maximoff really dead?
Yes. No. Maybe.
ah! Felt like they were teasing us.
And we try to do that with the music too, where, you know, we drop hints of Wanda's theme and like immediately like Reddit like picks up on that and you're like, wow, like they won't let any detail go unnoticed. I think it's really cool that like, you know, people are so invested with these characters and with these stories and wanting to like really dive into the details like that.
It must be also nice to know that the fans surrounding this show really appreciate the little details that maybe in other shows get overlooked, like the shifts in your score, the shifts in the costume, you know, like I remember seeing videos of people analyzing Lilia's coat and the detailing on there, which is, you know, not something you run into in every show. But as like an artist, does that make you feel good seeing how they're really noticing those things that you put so much love into?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think, you know, seeing the costumes, like Daniel's designs are just amazing, and like seeing the amount of detail that he puts into it and his team. So then by the time we're working on it, we're like, well, shit, now we have to follow suit. And I think just every element just has a lot of thought and care. And a lot of times too, like on projects, you don't get the time just to do stuff like that. But I think it's helpful, like when you have that sort of creative energy and creative leadership and collaboration that allows artists to do their thing. And I think that's, you know, something that sometimes you take for granted because you don't always get the chance to do stuff like that. And I think it's, again, something that's just is really cool, and it ultimately makes for like a better piece of art and better experience for everyone.
It felt like everyone was kind of allowed to shine in that way. Like I really felt like there was no like weak element of the show. Like I felt like the writing was good, the acting was good, the costumes were good, you know what I mean? It felt like everyone really rose up to it. The set was amazing. It was so refreshing seeing an actual set instead of just nonstop green screen, you know, and I'm sure for the actors that was probably so fun. You can tell that there was a certain degree of like creative freedom given to each artist, because it felt like it all went into the story, but then especially when later I would research the people who did what, like Daniel and whatnot, I could see their own individual touches and like, you know, inspiration in there, which I thought was really, really, really like special.
Yeah, I think, again, like, you know, Jack and Mary really created this coven, and, you know, just enabling their collaborators to do their thing. And I think they had a really, really clear vision about, you know, what the story should be and what they're looking for, but then allowed us to really, you know, step forward and put our own stamp on that and find a way to really make it all work together. I think it's just something really beautiful.
In general, you know, the whole coming together, the whole like everyone being different and stuff is a big theme behind the scenes and also in the show. And I did want to ask you about the diversity in Agatha, because I think that was something a lot of people really loved and like latched onto. It was very refreshing, not only to have a group of almost all women, but to have women of different ages, different ethnicities. You know, I think it was so refreshing and so wonderful to see. In general, is that important to you when looking at projects, and how did it feel working on a project that was, you know, going to be so different and make those kind of waves?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, one of the best parts of the show. And I think also one of the best parts is just like working with this team, because not only is that diversity portrayed on screen, but, you know, off screen as well. Like they did a really good job of finding, you know, diverse voices in the writer's room and diverse voices on set, and hopefully like shows through in the storytelling itself, because it's something that kind of gets shut down sometimes, and you also don't normally see that sort of thing in like comic book stories or like superhero stories. And I think what's so special about this show too is like all these people are trying to reclaim their voices and reclaim their power, and I think there's just so much underneath all of that adds this extra layer of depth and resonance. And I think that's why you see like so many communities and marginalized people really respond to the show and really see themselves seen and heard in a way that they might have been like with another show. For me as like a white dude, like I have to like acknowledge that and like be aware of that. I try to do like my best part of like making this special for everyone, and no matter what project I'm working on. But I think there's an intentional effort on everyone like behind the camera to do that, then I think it's something that we're all aware of as we're working on it together. The internet, like I don't think they were ready for what the show was going to be. But I think, behind the scenes, we're all like, oh shit, like this is going to hit people in a different way. And I think now, actually seeing that come to fruition, I think is something that I'm really grateful for. And, I think it's really exciting to see that. And I think, wanting to have more stories like that.
Especially, when we think of like Patti LuPone's main episode, that episode was performed so well. It had such a crazy response. People loved it. I'm curious if you think or you're hoping that this will make a statement as to what people want to see in media, because I think oftentimes, companies think it's risky to have like queer people in there, or they think no one's going to be interested in the story of a 70-something-year-old woman. But like everyone loved it. Everyone responded to it. So I'm curious if you think that's going to hopefully create a shift.
Yeah, I would hope so. And I think, with kind of everything that Agatha was as a show, like it was always defying expectations. And I think like you said, you see that with, the diversity of, sexuality, of age, of ethnicity, and like you're seeing people of all different backgrounds, on screen coming together to create, this really cool group that's just fun to hang out with and watch. And like, I think what's cool too about it is like the show like doesn't get like preachy about it and like soapboxing. I think, some people are like turned off by that sort of thing. For me, at least, like I think like the best way to inspire change and to really, highlight these things is to do it and to show it. You become on board with that. And I think that's what, is so cool about Agatha is everyone's like, well, it's just like this group of, this is like a girl show. And like, I don't, it's not for me. I don't get it. But then it comes out and everyone's like, oh shit, like this is actually really funny and really good. And I think hopefully people actually see that. And you see too, like there's been the past few years like a shift of like a more original storytelling, this sort of strong independent filmmaking sort of ethos that, even though Agatha's like within, the bigger Marvel universe, it also got, nominated for the Independent Spirit Awards and also got nominated for GLAAD Awards. Like it's being recognized by all these different communities that don't always seem, and then like the TV Academy, like all these different bodies that maybe don't all have this overlap. But I think that's what's so special about the show itself is because it is able to reach so many different types of people. I would hope that, the decision makers out there recognize that and feel inspired to tell more stories like that.
Yeah, I hope so, because to me it just showed that people are hungry for something, different, for something real. I don't want to just see the same type of person or story over and over and over again. Like this, like I said, it felt like a breath of fresh air, truly. And of course, when I heard the show was coming out, I was immediately like, this is for me. Because I was like, all right, gay witches running around singing with Patti LuPone.
Oh, great fire!
As a gay witchy theater kid, that was like, okay, this is gonna be my show. But I think so many other people were surprised how much they liked it. Because, obviously I knew I'd probably like it, but everyone I knew who watched it liked it, but also had different things about it that they really liked. There really was something for everybody. I think that's what was really lovely about it. And like to your point too, like so many different communities saw themselves. You know, especially the queer community, obviously, it really resonated with them, especially Billy's story. As someone who's used to, like, if there is any queer representation, it's sort of sprinkled and, like, implied, but it's not confirmed. It was so nice to just be like, nope, these characters are gay. And that's fine, and that's just who they are, and it wasn't even a huge thing in the story. It was just, that's just who he is.
And I think that, yeah, that's what's so important, is just having that authenticity. Again, it goes back to having diversity behind the screen, and people are able to give their perspective and their experiences, and it's not someone, you know, stereotyping what they think that should be. And so that's why I think you see, like, with Billy's story, and with, you know, Agatha and Rio's relationship, and, you know, in this political environment, we get so up in arms about certain things, and it's like completely unnecessary. But I think that's what's beautiful about the show, is like, it doesn't matter who you are, and we're all characters trying to grow together, and ultimately, like that's what's compelling storytelling.
And it was. And like I said, the show is, I mean, people are begging for a season 2. People are all about it. You know, people loved it. And I do want to segue into this, because I think this is something that not a lot of people, or maybe people behind the scenes, maybe even realized. I think there are the obvious communities that the show reaches, like the queer community and just women in general, because it's a very woman-heavy story. But, you know, I am a disability advocate online, as well as an actor and content creator. And a lot of people with chronic illnesses, disabilities follow me. And it really resonated with that community in a way that I don't know. Were you guys anticipating the disabled community to have it resonate with them?
No, I guess wasn't necessarily expecting that. And I think kind of goes to what we were saying earlier, that it's able to you reach so many different types of people. And so many different life experiences. And I think that's what's important about having, like, diverse representation on screen, because anyone can see themselves in that story. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about, I guess, your work as an advocate, and like how did the show, like, you know, resonate with those communities. And I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Well, a little context surrounding me. I wasn't disabled my whole life. During the lockdown, I wasn't doing too well. Body took on a lot of stress, and I just randomly started passing out. I was living in New York, so I thought I'll come home for a couple weeks, go see some doctors, try to see what's going on, and then I'll come back. Well, that has turned into years, and eventually I was diagnosed with a form of dysautonomia called neurocardiogenic syncope. It causes all kinds of symptoms, you know, fainting, chronic fatigue, brain fog, nausea. Basically, you just don't feel good.
Like, most of the time. So I was housebound, like, practically for like 2 years. And it changed my perspective on the world completely. Because, you know, there's the classic, you never think that's going to happen to you. And then it does. And suddenly it's like, I went from being very qualified, you know, have a degree, have been acting since I was 5 years old, I'm ready, to suddenly, because of this, people being like, well, you're a liability now, so you can't act anymore. I even had a friend tell me, well, maybe you can ask if they'll put you, like, in the back. And I was just like, okay, I think you're trying to be nice, but it's not working. And that was devastating, because, you know, that's a huge part of my identity, was acting and, you know, being on stage. It was a very isolating experience, but that's when social media became so integral, because it allowed me to connect. I got on there and I was making content and I was talking about my experiences, and I would, you know, people would reach out to me from all over the world. It's been really special, like, meeting people, but also having a completely different perspective. I think that's why one of the characters I really relate to is Jen. Jen had this outside force suddenly out of nowhere encroach upon her life, and she suddenly couldn't do the things she had always been able to do. And I thought, when I was watching that, and just her having to navigate completely relearning how to live. I mean, she's used to being able to do magic. She's used to now she has to completely rethink her whole life, and it feels like a part of her identity has been taken from her. And that was something and I know a few other friends I've talked to really resonated with, because, you know, you do feel like suddenly out of nowhere your identity has been stripped from you. You know, in the last year or so, I'm not housebound anymore. I've improved. I get out, I do things, but I've been sort of bulldozing my way back into the industry a little bit. I did do a professional show, but there was no protocol for people like me. Like, we didn't know what to do. No one knew what to do. We had to figure it out as we went along. It was very taxing to try to figure it out because they were just like, we don't know what to do with you. And so we had to do a lot of trial and error and figuring it out. And it did end up working. And I had people come up to me afterward and apologize because they thought I wouldn't be able to do it. And I'm like, disabled people can. It just looks different. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are not willing to make those changes or, take a chance, so to speak. So I use my platform online. Of course, I talk about theater, I talk about witchy stuff, I talk about fashion and stuff, but I also talk about the disabled, experience because I think it's an experience that gets very overlooked. And the amount of talented artists I know all over the world who just are not given the chance because of their conditions is tragic. I know so many amazing actors, artists, musicians who just feel like they can't do it anymore. That's why it's really important to me as someone who did develop a platform to speak about it because I'm very fortunate because of my platform to be able to do cool stuff like this and be able to reach people. And not everyone has that. And so it's very important to me in everything I do to discuss. And like I said, though, the amount of comments I got from just people in the community who really just connected with the show. Some connected with Alice, the fact that she had this curse placed on her. And she also couldn't live the way she wanted to live. It was amazing how each person I talked to related to someone different in the way that they're all being held down by something. Agatha, too, she gets her powers taken from her, but they all persevere anyway when they're come together and they work together. But it's something that I would love to be more of a conversation. And I think this show, at least on my page, really opened the door for that conversation, which I'm very grateful for. And I just feel like I'm not sure if everyone is totally aware that that was happening, but the disabled community was really like, oh, this show resonates with us, in a different way. And like I said, you don't hear from us very often. So it's really important to me to discuss.
That was really cool. I don't think it's something I necessarily would have expected, but then you look at it and all these characters are disabled in different sorts of ways. Like,
Yeah.
each character has certain things that are preventing them from accessing their full selves. And I think, that's disheartening to hear about, the gatekeeping that, you and like other people in your community have, faced. But I think it's really special that you're able to be resourceful and finding your own way to, to build that community and to empower each other. And like, that's what in the show, like that's ultimately these witches come together and like they're all struggling in, different capacities, but they're able to combine their strengths and combine their resources to uplift each other. And I think that's what's really important, no matter like who you are and like what your background is. And like we all have different things that we might struggle with or different things that might impact, our abilities to pursue things or to create things. And I think it's everyone finding their own personal coven to again empower each other. And I think, also make the changes that we're hoping to make and finding ways to, as we were talking earlier about paying it forward, finding ways to make things easier for the next group of people that might have similar circumstances or face similar problems or challenges. And I think, again, there's like an awareness that we all need to have of that. And, knowing that, my situation is going to be completely different than someone else's situation, and understanding why those differences exist and, what is it culturally or socially that contribute to that? What is it, these other factors that really have an impact, and like understanding privilege as well, and like what that means for a lot of people. Yeah, I'm curious, like, are there certain, I guess, advocacy groups or organizations that, like, where would someone find out more how to join these communities?
Yeah, so dysautonomia is an umbrella term, and there's lots of different conditions underneath it. The most popular one being POTS. Dysautonomia International is where a lot of people go to get information. It's where they do a lot of fundraisers and things of that nature. I do have a friend, Sam, who is also, she's starting a podcast talking to disabled actors specifically. Just in general, too, the best way I've found to get involved is seeking out people online who talk about it in general. I feel like the best thing for people with particularly invisible disabilities, where you look at them and you're not necessarily thinking, I follow a lot of really amazing content creators who talk about it, who really just do a lot of education. I'll link all of those down below so that everyone can see them because they're amazing. The big thing is education. I think that's the biggest thing, and representation. Education and representation. Just having more people like us in the arts, in sports, in these different places. And truly, I can only speak as an actor's point of view, but, actors are supposed to really understand and embody what it means to be a person and to be human. And I feel like people in my community, we are human, we're living the human experience, but we're also forced to sit down and do a lot of observing because we have to. We can't always move the same way as everybody else or do things. There are days I'm still in bed, so we have a very unique perspective on the world. I'm really just hopeful that it becomes more of a conversation in Hollywood and on stage to the point where, like, the next person, for example, comes to do a show and there are protocols in place and there is something there. They're not trying to figure it all out on their own how to make it work. It puts a lot of undue stress on the person. And also just like, having conversations like we're having now. We're talking about art. We're talking about people who are affected by this kind of stuff. Like having these kinds of dialogues, I just think are relevant because, who knows, we might get off of here. You might strike a conversation with somebody else who didn't know anything about it, who then might talk to somebody else, I'm very fortunate on the front that I have family and stuff who look out for me, and I'm all right in that regard. But the more awareness comes to it, the more help we can give to people who are in less fortunate situations too with it. Because I have a lot of friends who are really struggling. This show gave them a lot of joy. I mentioned to a couple friends I was doing this, and they were so excited.
Yeah. And I want to touch on too, like what you said earlier, as as an actor, your perspective of trying to understand what it is to be human. Any sort of artist and creator, I think that's what we're trying to do, is learn different perspectives and understand what that means as a storyteller. And I think there's a certain responsibility we have, to honor that and to honor people that live a life that might look different, way different than the life that we live. To really acknowledge that and respect that. And I think that just again comes from surrounding ourselves with a multitude of different people, because everyone's got something unique and special and cool that, like, there's something about your life that I never would have thought about or never would have experienced, but then hearing the cool stuff that you're doing, then that's now something that's inspiring to me, and I can go and share that. I think it's everyone, we're all human beings, and we're all in this like messy world together. And like, I think that's what's so cool about being a storyteller, is that we get the opportunity to sort of combine all these different talents and skills and things to like try to make sense of it all. There's something communal, like literally sitting around the campfire, like telling stories. I think there's an aspect of that I try to keep sight of in every sort of collaboration that I have. And I think that's something that's really important, as again, as we're talking about, just trying to understand what it is to be human. And being a human has so many different shapes and sizes and colors and qualities to it that that's why we're all different. But at the end of the day, we're also part of this this one brotherhood, one sisterhood, just trying to understand each other and love each other better. And I think that's make the coven proud.
Yeah, especially in the world we live in now, things are tough. We can't do it alone. We gotta be there for each other. And I think as artists, to your point, we have sort of a responsibility, and we're all connected. Like, this is sort of funny, but I know you worked on Frozen 2. And I, right when I was just coming out of the closet, one of my first dates I went on with a girl in New York City was going to see Frozen 2, and all the songs like that were in that movie and the score and the like show yourself and all that, I was sitting there crying. And then like very shortly after that is when I sort of came out to the last remainder of people that I needed to come out to. Who knew like years later that someone who was a part of that music and process, we would be chatting, and I'm like, I remember crying in Frozen 2. You know, it goes to show like we're connected and you have no idea what the art you're creating, how it really is affecting people, you know? Like you didn't know there was some closeted girl in New York City on a date with her date looking at her very strangely. While she cried during Frozen 2.
Wow, that's really touching. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, like you said, like art just has a way of impacting people in ways like you never expect, and it's something too that like as someone who like that wants to that consumes art, and it becomes of a way of how we like communicate ourselves to other people, and by the things we share, by the movies we watch together, the music we listen together, go shows, and that sort of becomes a way to help sort of like express what's deep down inside and what's going on in here that no one else can understand or really have a grasp in. And I think it's really special hearing that, like being able to use art and creation and as a way of connecting with other people, in a way of building something together. That's really powerful.
Yeah, because I think most of the time we'll never know the impact that was made. You know what I mean? Like the odds of you finding out that story were very slim, in the grand scheme of things. I think about even just the people in, like, just Agatha as a show, like, moved me very much. Like, I remember sitting there being like, this is why I want to act. I want to be in stuff like this, cool, amazing, inspiring projects like this. It excited me as an artist. It made me like, ooh, yeah, this is why I want to do this, and that's really special. But, a lot of people you never realize. Like, I just think about Patti LuPone. She's been my icon since I was like 7 years old, and a big driving force into why I never stopped acting, because I admired her courage. And I didn't have a lot of courage, but she had courage. Someone who, on the other side of the country, who has never met me, doesn't know I exist, but played such a pivotal role in my life. And I just think that's really cool. And so, like I said, like, that's why I wanted to make sure you knew about the disabled community and stuff and how it resonated with them, because I feel like so often we never actually know the impact that was made.
Yeah. And I think that's been probably one of my favorite parts of Agatha since it's come out, is like hearing from some of the fans. And I spoke at WonderCon a few weeks ago and got to actually interact with some fans in person, and going to Comic-Con this year. It's cool, yeah, just seeing the impact that the show has and how much people feel seen and heard, and something just really special.
No, it is. And I'm very grateful that you got back to me and we were able to like connect and stuff. I don't know what the future behind Agatha will be or anything like that, but to get a peek inside like the process and how much it meant to you guys as well. Like, we felt that, but it's nice to hear that it seems like you guys were having just as much fun making it as we did watching it.
Yeah, definitely. I also don't know the future what's in store, but I know I loved it, and I think it was just a really unique collaboration. You don't really get to experience, every time you work on something. Again, like everyone, aware of that, and it's always keeps going back to the coven.
It truly does always come back to the coven. Well, I have to ask too, do you have anything coming up next?
Yeah, I've been working on an album lately, outside of film and TV. So I've been having fun with that, and working with different artists, different singers and rappers and vocalists and other musicians, and getting to explore genres and styles of music that I don't necessarily get to do with film scoring. Really been enjoying that, and sort of flexing a different muscle and like doing something a little different. And I think for me as a musician, is like I always just enjoy learning and creating and exploring and like experimenting and having a different experience than like what I have had previously, and go down that journey.
That's cool. You'll have to let us know when the album is coming out.
I'm finding it's a lot slower process than film scoring. You know your deadline before anything else, and you're like just immediately like pedal to the metal. And here it's like, well, I'm in control of how this goes. Yeah, I will definitely be sharing that once as they get it together. But
I'm
it's just
excited. I will put the pressure on you. I'll be like, all right, I'm gonna give you a deadline. So, like, before we close out on everything, is there anything else just about the process or about just like what you do in general or art in general that you really want to speak on?
Yeah, I guess I'd love to give a shout out to, the bigger coven that, we've worked on with the show, but there's also the musical coven. It's not just me and Chris sitting at the keyboard. Like there's so many other people that go into the process that really help bring this, the music to life. Just all these different people that come together to really make the magic happen, and always grateful. And it's just always in awe of like seeing other people's talents and getting to come together and create things as a team. And I think it's something that's really cool about creating film and creating music, and something that I just really enjoy.
Awesome, because yeah, it's very much a collaboration. So I think that's quite, lovely to like shout out and, remind everybody that there are so many people behind the scenes. I watched the Agatha behind the scenes thing on YouTube that Marvel posted. And it's just, I mean, I already knew this, but it's still just seeing how, like, there's so many people involved, that make it what it is. The collaboration behind that is part of what makes it what it is, and part of what makes it lovely, and part of what I think made the show feel like a big coven.
Really special people making really special things.
So I want to thank you so much for being here. I
Of course.
really appreciate you having this discussion with me. I had a really nice time, and do keep us updated on, where we can see you next.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for doing this. There's always something coming up, so I'll definitely keep you posted. And also just excited to see the links and check out, the amazing work that you've been doing. Both keep creating cool things.
We definitely will. Something tells me that neither of us are even capable of stopping.
Like you said earlier, like there's like physically impossible. Like there's this like visceral like need to keep going, and
Like a
can't
drug, you
imagine.
just can't quit it.
Exactly. I think
All
of more
right.
like oxygen. You like physically
Yes.
you can't survive without it.
No, truly, truly. I tried a couple of times and I'm like, I can't. Gotta go back. Gotta go back. I need my fix.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Thank you to everybody who watched, and we will see you next time.
Oh, thanks everyone.
Down, 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 down the road. She's down, 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 down. It's time to